Hi everyone, this is Rebecca Mills. I'm a junior evangelist at DataStax. Today I'm here to tell you about what I think is a really important topic, and it's a topic that isn't really known in a lot of great detail by a lot of people. So these are things you should be doing when using Cassandra drivers, regardless of what programming language you're using. And now I don't claim to be an expert, but I have done some investigating, and I picked out some important features that I think everyone should be using to make their experience using the Cassandra drivers a good one. So a little about what sorry, one second. Having some technical difficulties here. A little about what I do at the company.
Hold on here.
All right, one second.
There you go.
A little about what I do at the company. I try to create awareness for open source Cassandra, and I do that by developing content like blog posts, tutorials, walkthroughs, and webinars. And I also have my own Twitter account, which you guys should definitely check out. Part of my job is also to step into the shoes of a newbie and try to determine what kind of problems people just being introduced to Cassandra might be encountering, which may not be so obvious to an expert. And this whole newcomer perspective extends to the drivers as well. I want to make the drivers seem as easy and approachable as I can for everyone, so I'm developing beginners content around them as well. So this webinar is not language specific. I'm going to jump around to a couple of languages in my examples, like Python and Java. But since the APIs are pretty much the same across all the DataStax drivers, almost everything I talk about is applicable to any of them. So DataStax provides drivers for Java, Python, and C#, and most recently Ruby, Node.js, and C++, so that's really exciting. There's also loads of open source drivers to choose from, so you have a lot of options. We have links to a lot of these on the Planet Cassandra site. I would actually think of it as a definitive list. There's also some tutorials I've done up that you can have a look at. Okay, so first I want to look at some really basic common sense kind of things we should be doing when using a driver. So if you're really new to the drivers, this is kind of the bread and butter. So a cluster instance allows you to configure different important aspects of the way connections and queries will be handled. At this level, you can configure contact points, which is the addresses of the nodes to be contacted initially before the driver performs node discovery. There's also retry policies and load balancing policies. Usually such settings are done once at the application level. While the API of a session is centered around query execution, it also does some heavy lifting behind the scenes as it manages per-node connection pools. Since it's a long-lived object, it should not be used in a short-lived fashion with requests and responses. You're going to want to use the same cluster and session instances across your application. This is what should be at the top of your application code, and only one time. Use this session in the rest of your code. So if you want to execute a statement more than once, you should be using prepared statements. It's a better alternative to having data you want inserted, hard-coded as part of a string. In this case, our query is only sent over the server and parsed once. We just change the parameters each additional time. We will talk about this in a little more depth in a few seconds. Let's get into some cool, as well as useful features you should be using to have the best programming experience with Cassandra, regardless of your programming language. Now I want to look at some features you should be using if you want your client to be interacting with Cassandra in the most performant way possible. These features should definitely speed things up a bit. I actually like cool and useful together myself. We're going to look at prepared statements, load balancing policies, and as a part of that, retry policies and connection pooling, as well as async API. Overall, prepared statements are more performant than using strings. They will be parsed only once on the server side, as opposed to a string, which will be parsed every time it's sent. So if you're using the same query over and over with different parameters, this is definitely the way to go. Also, because parameters are not hard-coded into the string, but sent separately, we are able to avoid SQL injection. So let's consider a string. Our data for Bob Jones is baked into the string we send over to the server. This is fine if we are only inserting one row of data into our database. But we might want to add multiple users with the same insert statement. We might actually want to add hundreds or thousands of users. It's impractical to use strings at this point. Now with prepared statements, the data we want to send along with the strings gets sent separately as a parameter, almost like a variable. The prepared statement only gets sent once, and the parameters are the only thing that changes. So what's the difference behind the scenes? As opposed to sending your queries as strings, which results in a large amount of data at a large parse cost, with prepared statements, they only get parsed on the server side once. They are cached on the server in a concurrent hash map stored in memory. The next time, only the parameters and the prepared statement ID are sent over the wire. The MD5 part of the prepared statement is a key matching a value in the hash map. If we send our insert statement with our data embedded as part of the string, it's a large amount of data and a large parse cost when every single string must be parsed over the server. So we can see why a prepared statement would probably be a better option. So what does this all mean to the developer? It means that your queries are much faster and your client is much more performant. This is from a blog post at Netflix showing the difference in throughput when using prepared statements versus not. You can see there's about 5 times as much throughput when using prepared statements. Probably what's very obvious to everybody is that using prepared statement in a for loop is just a big no-no. This would cancel out all the performance benefits of using a prepared statement in the first place. The query is built and sent again each time, and the server ends up being bombarded with the same query over and over. This is probably even less efficient than using strings. So now we're going to talk a little bit about load balancing. Load balancing policies are responsible for routing requests, determining which nodes the driver must connect to, as well as the order in which different nodes will be tried in case of network failures. Each cluster can be configured with a specific node balancing policy to be used, and that same policy will be used for all requests across all sessions managed by the cluster instance. So we're going to look at a little example. As we can see, this cluster is configured with a token-aware policy wrapped around a DC-aware round-robin policy, and we're also using the default retry policy. We're also just going to use a simple example data model. We've created a users table with a username, first name, and last name. We're also going to insert 2 rows of data to get ourselves started. Our cluster for discussion purposes has a replication factor of 3. To simplify our token range is from 0 to 100, but real token ranges are actually much bigger. Each node is responsible for 1/4 of the token range. The client connects to the node listed in the contact points. So node pin.0.0.1 is aware of the entire cluster and token layout, and the node responds with a list. The list then populates the connection pool, and each token range is stored per node, including replicas. When the client executes a select statement, the statement is parsed. We'll assume a consistency level of 1 for this example. The primary key is examined, and the string rmils is hashed using murmur3. The string rmils hashes to token 15. Since our load balancing policy is token aware, we will now use the token produced by hashing the primary key. Using the token 15, we will then look for the corresponding nodes. The token 15 matches on ranges held by 3 nodes. Those 3 nodes will now be addressed when looking for token 15. We also added a data center aware round-robin policy. This means we will first look at only the replicas in the local data center, which is DC1 annotated here. Round-robin is a method that cycles through the list of replica nodes for that token range. We will start at the first node listed, then the second node, and then the third node. And it repeats. It will skip any non-replica nodes in the connection pool. Now a situation where a node is down. We start at the first node as usual, and then the second. Once we get a timeout, the node is marked down from the connection pool. We retry the same request on the third replica, and it repeats. In this case, we're going to eliminate the token-aware routing and just use round-robin. We're still going to look at the token. String P McFadden is hashed using murmur3, and we see that string McFadden hashes to token 77. In this case, we don't use the token for load balancing decisions. But string P McFadden is only on 3 nodes in the list. That is only 1 hop away on the first node, first 2 nodes. On the third node, since the data is not on this node, we need to coordinate to a replica. The data is then sent back through the coordinator, and the round-robin continues. Since you're adding 1 more hop to coordination, it can be inefficient, especially as the cluster gets larger. So the default behavior used to be round-robin. This has changed due to the fact that token-aware is much more performant. It acts as a filter around a child policy, and only replicas will be considered when using it. So we won't be wasting our time on non-replica nodes waiting for them to coordinate. I also wanted to mention the whitelist policy in passing. This policy ensures that queries are only performed on a given list of nodes of your choosing, and it limits the effect of auto-discovery of peer nodes. The native binary protocol supports pipelining, which means multiple requests and responses can be sent over the same connection simultaneously. This makes asynchronous statements possible. We don't have to wait for a response from our cluster to continue running our code. Instead, almost immediately, we will get a future object, which is like a promise. A future is a placeholder for the statement that was just executed. I also want to mention in passing that all asynchronous methods end in async. When you do a select query and execute async, the future that holds the execute for you while you do the future holds that execute for you while you do other work. This execute gets run on the server. When you do ask for the result, it then blocks. It's useful in doing concurrent coding, and if used properly, it can be really fast. Session.execute just sits there otherwise. Using futures can be handy. If you're executing things over and over again, you can send them down the pipe, and when you iterate over these futures, you can pull out the results as they come in. So now that you've heard about all these really cool features with the drivers, you may be wondering where you can download them for yourself and give them a test run. So Planet Cassandra is a great place for Cassandra resources. You can find all sorts of stuff there like blog posts, webinars, tutorials, and a whole lot more. But it's also a great place for all your driver needs. So once you're on Planet Cassandra, you're going to want to go to the download section and into the client driver section. I've spent a good bit of time delving into the different drivers, and I've developed some walkthroughs taking you through the basics of getting up and running with the drivers. And there's even a lot of topics there I did not touch on in this webinar. Here you can find links to the DataStax drivers as well as many of the open source drivers. So if you guys are just getting started with Apache Cassandra or any of the other drivers, I would love to hear about your experience. You can easily find me on Twitter. Thank you guys for tuning into my webinar, and if there's any questions, you can go ahead and ask them now.
All right. Well, so we have some openings for questions and answers. Thank you, Rebecca. So let me ask you this real quick, too. So right now, we just released a Ruby driver and a Node.js driver. So you've been writing a lot of content, right, for this stuff?
Yeah.
And so planetcassandra.org?
Yeah, planetcassandra.org. You can find a lot of the tutorials. I've done up beginner tutorials for different DataStax drivers. I recently just put out one for the new Ruby driver.
So now with those, I mean, does it require a lot of experience with Cassandra, or how can someone get started with Cassandra too?
Well, I would suggest going, actually, you need the keyspace and the setup from the Try Cassandra section of the website. So I would recommend someone go through the Try Cassandra tutorial part of the website and then move on to the drivers.
All right. Well, we have a few questions, actually quite a few. So, and thank you for those. So the first question here, is a prepared statement bound on one session, or is it usable on another session?
You can only, it's only bound on one session. You can't use it on another one.
So I would have to, if I wanted to use the same type of or two different sessions, well, it wouldn't make any sense, would it?
No.
No, you wouldn't have two sessions running at the same time, right?
It would only be associated with one key space.
I guess someone, if they were trying to connect to two different clusters, would have to have two different sessions. Right?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know when you would want to do that. But interesting question that points out, like you said, sessions there's one session per code, right?
Right.
So you would put everything into that session.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So how about, all right, so there's another question here. Does the query builder in Java have a way for generating prepared statements? We didn't really cover query builder, though.
Yeah, that's actually, I did a part of one of my tutorials I did up on Planet Cassandra was about query builder, but
Well, in a nutshell, I mean, we don't need to go into big detail here, but I mean, there's probably a lot of people who are like, Query Builder, you didn't talk about Query Builder. In a nutshell, what is Query Builder? What does it do? I mean, is it just for building the query, period?
It's only
it sounds like that.
Yeah, it's only in the Java driver.
Yeah, okay.
It's actually another good way to get around SQL injection.
So it's only in the Java driver.
Yeah.
And that's probably worth pointing out too, is that it's not universal to all DataStax drivers. But I think the question is whether it generates a prepared statement. That is like a prepared statement when you use Query Builder.
Yeah, it's essentially the same thing.
Yeah.
It avoids using strings. That's another way of avoiding using strings.
Right.
In my mind.
There's a
and
SQL
it's essentially
injection.
a prepared statement in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Right. So how do you get the token ranges using the Cassandra driver? Ooh, man, that's get an advanced user here.
You can't get the token ranges using the Cassandra driver, unfortunately.
No, but I believe that's a CQL command, right? The token command, I believe.
Yeah, I think you can get them.
Yeah.
I don't remember the command, but it is a component of CQL.
Yeah, so you'd have to use a token. You'd have to use CQL.
Yes, you'd have to use CQL in order to discover the token ranges.
It may be, and it might be worth looking into, but it's not an easy one to answer now. Maybe that somewhere underneath you can ask. I mean, but it's a murmur3 hash, right?
Yes.
So you could just hash it yourself and get the token. Actually, that's probably the easier way to do it, right?
Yeah.
I think we just answered that question. For the token ranges, maybe for the individual servers as well. So actually, I have a more advanced answer for that. If you look at the systems table in Cassandra, the token ranges are in there. So that's more CQL. So what is the best practice for writing in batches? Uh-oh, someone's been watching my Twitter stream. I mean, I think what he's asking here is, like, how would you do batches?
Oh, just small batches.
Yeah.
I would recommend, yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of near and dear to my heart, right? Because I actually just filed a JIRA on Friday to, well, there's a warning JIRA for large batches. Now there's a JIRA out for failing on large batches. Batches are pretty much, large batches are an anti-pattern.
Right.
I always like to say batches are for atomicity and not an optimization. Do not use large batches. Sorry, you kind of hit my own personal pet peeve. Batches. If I see large batches going into the system, I'll get on you about it. Next question. Could I see an example one more time of the future result set array for execute in async? I think you're going to have your slides online, though, right?
Yeah, I'll put those up on SlideShare.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
or on Planet Cassandra.
Yeah, it'll be
I'll get them up there
somewhere.
Somewhere they'll be out there, yeah.
Yeah, so we can answer it that way. Is there a convenient way of mapping between futures return from the async calls and Scala's future classes? We don't really have a Scala driver right now.
Yeah, we don't really have a Scala driver at this point.
Yeah, it's kind of like, well, I mean, I think that's something that's being talked about right now, though. Right?
Yeah, we're kind of in the process of embracing Scala more.
Right. I mean, but we saw that was a Python example you did.
Yeah.
And
yes, it was Python.
In the Java does futures as well.
Yes, yeah.
So
Ruby.
And the Ruby.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Rubies are promises, not futures. But so I think it would be natural to think that I would assume that Scala's future classes would map as well. Here's an easy one for me. Can we get this recording? Sure, we'll be putting it online soon. Just watch Rebecca's, watch her Twitter, and she'll be posting whenever this is online, or Planet Cassandra. We do post our webinars out probably 2 or 3 days after we're done. It'll be up by next week. All right, how about batches spanning a keyspace? Boy, people love their batches, don't they? I mean, so I think the question here is, can you, in a single batch, can you do more than one keyspace?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, it's just a bunch of different statements.
Right,
really.
right.
Yeah. Do you gain write performance by using a token-aware connection? I think we saw that graph, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because you're not wasting any time on nodes that are not.
Oh, we saw the one on prepared statements. I'm sorry, I kind of threw you off there.
Yeah.
So the token-aware, we never saw a graph for that.
No, it was a read.
I think this might be some good content
Yeah.
sometime. But I mean, that's why we're using token aware, though, right? It's for performance.
That's exactly why we're using token aware.
Yeah, but Stefan, I think you actually have opened up the door for a really great blog post about whether or not token aware and how efficient it really is. But we do know that it is more efficient. I think a good measurement would be good. Can you query the local table? I'm not sure what that means. Local table, maybe system table?
I'm not really sure what the question is.
Jeff, if you have a clarification, why don't you type that in? But so Tim asks, where or when do you set the consistency level in the Java driver? Is that just set for the one statement or on the session?
Yeah, you set the consistency level on the whole session once. It goes for the whole application.
Then, all right, so that means when you create the session, there's a consistency level, like a default consistency level.
Yeah.
And then what about if I want to do it per connection?
Yeah, you can also do it per connection if you wanted to.
Well, there's also a retry policy that changes consistency level too, right?
Yeah, there's also the downgrading consistency level retry policy where if you have trouble connecting such that you can't meet your consistency level requirements, it'll actually bring the consistency level down such that on your next retry you will get a response, but you won't be reaching the consistency level you had set.
So that would take, like, if I was a quorum, it would go down to 1 at that point?
Yeah, depends on how big your cluster is.
Yeah, Tim, watch out for that one.
Yeah.
As a consultant for years, I'm always worried when people change their consistency level just to try to get away with things, but it might make sense in some cases, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Depends on how rigid you want to be about your consistency level.
Right. And the rule still stands, right? Every request to Cassandra, it has a consistency level in it of some sort, yeah. So Eric asks, so to confirm the load balancing, the client can be aware of which nodes are the primary replica nodes so that it can skip the nodes that don't hold data. If the ring is out of whack and needs to be repaired, you'd have to scan the entire ring. Big question. So let's break this down. So is the client aware of which nodes have the data for the token?
Yes, if you're using token aware.
Yeah, so yeah, I think that's the question there. So basically you're asking, is token aware a thing? Absolutely.
Yes.
And then, if the ring's out of whack and needs to be repaired, you'd have to scan the entire ring. I mean, I don't think that doesn't really matter in this case. I mean, if the data isn't there because it needs to be repaired, that's not going to be in the table, though. We're not going to see, like, repair status in a connection pool, are we?
No, I wouldn't think so, no.
No. And so in that case, yeah, I think it's just, if your cluster's that out of whack, I think you've got another problem here. Not something the driver's really going to help you with in this case, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But if I get you right here, Eric, is you're worried about this inconsistency because your data is really messed up in your ring. Fix your ring first. The driver's not going to really fix it on that one. Large data sets using Spring Batch. Okay, I think that's a question. Here we go again. Hey, Rebecca, can I do really large batches?
I wouldn't recommend it, no.
No, that's an anti pattern. I mean, seriously, the default threshold for warning on batch size is 5K total size. Don't do large batches. Batches, as an old relational guy, I can tell you I used to use a lot of batches there because it made sense because it was on a single server. Don't use large batches in Cassandra because what you're doing is you're essentially turning the coordinator node into a big load balancer, and it just is very inefficient. You're better using, I mean, that's our buddy, right? Execute async.
Right, you could, yeah.
Go through all the different keys and just execute async. Async protocol is very nice for that. and it's much more efficient. All right, batches are my pet peeve. And what can be considered a large batch? I just said that. I mean, that was 5K in total size is where you start seeing warnings in the log. You know, if I see batches of more than 100, then I start getting nervous. Like 100 statements, it's just not efficient. You're better off doing one prepared statement, right? Execute async. Yeah. Sessions are long-lived instances. However, session has close method. Should one be closing a session ever?
Yeah, you should close. It's good practice to close your session once you're done running.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point to make. It's like leaving a file open.
Yeah.
Yeah, you wouldn't. I mean, sure, you could do exit and just shut the whole thing down, but it will stay open. Brandon asks, what details do future result set produce for like record info, success, fail, reason, or fail? I mean, so basically, what is a future result set?
It's a result set.
Yeah. So it is. I mean, it's just a placeholder.
Right.
So it's a response, I guess, but it's just a result set. So, but it should be now when. So a future isn't blocking, but when does it block?
It blocks when you finally call a future.
Right.
It's result. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So there you go, Brandon. It's just a result set. So whatever information's inside the result set will be a part of that. But you're going to block when you ask for it. Terry asks, what are about the Spark? Oh, here we go. Spark. Right on. Cassandra connector. Could I use it as a Scala driver? I might have been mistaken. Let me take that one because actually this is on the Spark side. No, because Spark connector is actually just for Spark. What's interesting is there are a lot of things in there that make it look like Spark. It looks like a Spark driver, but it's not directly. But stay tuned. I think that's coming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, the slides available online. We already answered that.
They will be available.
Yeah.
And shortly.
Can you comment on in versus multiple parallel queries? So I think this is a pretty common question. So an in statement, meaning like where you say where in and where primary key is in, it just creates this list. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't use that. Would you?
No.
So, and then, but we just commented on this multiple parallel queries, like async, doing async stuff. I think that's what we're asking here, Jeff, right? So I would say definitely using multiple parallel queries is where it's at.
Yeah.
And just based on what you showed, right? That with the async protocol, the fact that it's going to use all the different round robin and token aware and everything, each individual connection is going to be much more efficient that way. A prepared statement prepared on one session should have to be replicated and prepared on a different session in order to be used in different sets of batches, right? Ooh, man, let's see.
Wow.
Let's see, prepared on one session, replicated and prepared on a different session in order to use a different set of batches. Again, here we are with the different session. I'm not sure why you would want more than one session. If you're connecting to multiple clusters, perhaps.
That would be the only circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to just be one.
Yeah, and that goes to the need to have them, or what's going on actually behind the scenes with that session, right? I mean, it's connecting to the cluster and has a connection pool.
Right. It manages the node connection pool.
Yeah. So if you wouldn't really need.
No, you shouldn't need multiple sessions.
Right.
To replicate batches across.
Right. Jeff, system.local for tokens. Yes, you can actually do that. That's what we were mentioning before. It's go into the system table and you can see the token ranges. Yeah. And again, system table is completely open to CQL. You can do a select off the system tables. Mm-hmm. In regards to the Node.js driver, the current 1.0 beta driver is not backward compatible with 1.2. I noticed in the docs backward compatibility slide of 1.0, and I saw that to-do comments in the code. What's the roadmap on releasing 1.0? Wood, do you know?
I haven't had a good look at the Node.js driver yet. It just came out. So I'm not positive yet.
It's moving pretty fast, though.
Yeah.
I would expect that that's probably going to be in the next few weeks. And Yeah, the 1.2 compatibility is a tougher, because that's different. CQL binary protocol?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So it's just a different backward compatibility for the binary protocol. But it is coming pretty quick, and you could probably pose a question inside the Jira to-do or the GitHub issues if you were looking for an exact date. But I know it is moving rather quickly. I've talked to that team quite a bit, and they're very excited about that driver. And there's a lot of excitement around Node.js.
Yeah, there seems to be.
Yeah, and Ruby. I was actually really surprised. We've been talking to a lot of people that are using the Ruby driver now.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people seem to be pretty excited about that one.
Mm-hmm. And it's nice and fast. So what are the differences between CQL-based drivers and Thrift-based APIs? Oh, here we go. CQL versus Thrift. How do we determine which one should be used in what scenarios? So when would I ever use Thrift?
You would never use Thrift anymore.
Yeah.
CQL is the way to go.
I mean, we've been talking to people at Oracle Open World. A lot of experienced CQL people, a lot of experienced Thrift people, but I think the overriding thing is just the future of it, right? I mean, Thrift in 3.0 is frozen.
Yeah, it's been frozen.
Yeah, so
we're going forward with CQL.
Yeah, and I think really it's all about the feature set.
Yes, yeah.
If you're doing any new development, I mean, this is what you're doing on all your pages now.
Yeah, I'm only using CQL-based drivers.
It's really the way forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, Thrift is just it's an older way of getting things done, and I'm good to support that. So Jeff is back on this. You would connect to the cluster, retrieve the nodes, create new connections to each cluster using a whitelist to limit the node, and query the system local table to obtain the token. Sorry, I hope that makes sense. No, Jeff, you make no sense at all. I'm kidding. Yeah, so I'm trying to parse out why you're doing this. Connecting to the cluster, retrieving the nodes, create new connections to each cluster. You're still connecting to one cluster. You're not going to find maybe that it looks like you might be switching cluster and nodes as that terminology. A cluster is going to be all the nodes in your system, even across multiple data centers. So the only reason you would connect to a different cluster is if you had specifically created a new cluster for some reason. I've never seen that in a production environment where you have multiple clusters to connect to. It's possible.
Yeah.
But Jeff, you might want to hit us up on Twitter and get a little, or maybe Stack Overflow and kind of get into your use case a bit, because it might be something we need to dig into.
Yeah.
Stack Overflow is that should be a good thing to mention too. Stack Overflow is a great place.
Yeah, Stack Overflow is a great place if you have any questions. There's a lot of people out there who can probably help you.
Mm-hmm. You're on there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on there. Prepared statement does not perform well in a loop. What is the best way to batch multiple inserts through a prepared statement? I think he was pointing out your example where you did a prepared statement inside the loop.
Yes, I did.
So what was the better one of that? I mean, what's the best way to do it? I mean, where would you put the prepared statement in a loop?
Oh, it would be at where you do the binding of the parameters.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's what he's asking.
Yeah, okay.
So yeah, I mean, that's doing the prepared statement once. You in your examples, you even create like a static in the beginning or a final for the prepared statement in the beginning of your files, right?
Right. So
you just do it one time, Sandy, and then inside the loop.
And the loop would be where you do you bind the parameters.
Right. And going back to your diagram, it's what happens every time it hits that loop.
Right.
I mean, it's just sending over. What is it sending over to the server? It's the
prepared statement ID.
Prepared statement ID.
Yeah, along with the parameters, right.
So that's Sandy. That
really, would be the portion in the loop.
Right. Should that read Cassandra 1.3? I don't think so. I'm going to have to, there is going to be no 1.3, it's 3.0. There's a 1.3 CQL protocol, maybe? Okay, there it is. You got it. Basically, the problem is between 1.3 binary protocol and a 2.0 binary. Yes, of course. That's what we were mentioning earlier, is that there are different binary protocols from when we went from 1.2 to 2.0 compatibility issues. Can async API be used with a .NET Framework 4.0 or higher versions? Ooh. Do you know much about that particular angle in the C# driver, or do we need to get Luke?
Yeah, we need Luke for that one.
Yeah.
I'm not up on that.
Dave, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor here. So one of the evangelists on our team, his name is Luke Tillman. He's on Twitter. I think he'd probably be the best person to ask for that. He works a lot with C#, .NET. He works with Windows, Azure. He will be able to answer that question. Hit him up on Twitter. Tell him we said hi. But I think that he would probably be the best person to answer that. Dave also asked, does load balancing policy from client driver matter if the partition key is used in all queries?
Yeah, that should be a way around it, actually. You having to use, if you do specify the partition key, then.
Well, that's what it tokenizes, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, load balancing policy with token aware kind of requires it. I mean, you're going to have to. Yeah. In .NET, is the Cassandra row.get value? More .NET questions. Not as unaware. The only way to retrieve values for each column. It seems so much slow. Dave, I'm going to tell you, we probably are not the best person to ask, or the best people to ask this question. Again, if you'd like to hit up Luke, I think he could probably answer a lot of questions about this for sure. Is there any support for retry policy with a backoff? And I think that would be this.
Oh, the downgrading consistency, yeah.
Okay, all right, maybe, yeah. So, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what we're talking about for a backoff. Or it could be that the backoff would be, it would wait for a few seconds and then reconnect, maybe.
Potentially, yeah.
So
I'm not really sure.
That doesn't exist, but you could write it. Now so that's an interface, right? The retry policy.
Yeah, it's an interface. Right?
So you could implement your own type of retry policy.
Yeah, you can customize it to your own wants if you wanted. I just went to the default.
Yeah, the default
situation. Yeah.
So yeah, Gary, that's actually a good point to make. Is that if you do have some custom requirements on any of these policies, it's an interface. You can implement your own.
You can tweak it to whatever way works best for you.
Yeah. And downgrading retry policy is not always the best choice.
No.
Tomas says, hello, I have some difficulties with paging through a row set. I went through the training in Java development, could figure out from the samples how to do it the right way. Is there some example available on DataStax web or elsewhere? Do we have a paging example? You know?
Yeah, I don't know actually.
DataStax examples is a GitHub repo.
Okay.
I believe there is an example on there for paging.
Okay. Yeah.
That's actually pretty new. So Tomas, if you look on GitHub, there's a user called DataStax examples. Check that out. There's a lot of good code in there actually for everybody on this call. But I think there was actually directly a paging example and how to do paging with. And again, that's what version 2.0, right? So,
yes. Yeah.
So yeah, 2.0 and above has built-in paging support. Brandon asks, when opening a new connection, should I use one host IP or multiple?
Well, if you use one host IP, it'll auto-discover. It'll connect to the entire cluster. I don't really...
I think it goes along the line with seed nodes. You can do one.
Yeah.
But having more than one gives you a little more resilience in case that one node disappears on you. Right?
True, yeah.
Yeah. And we don't want to have a situation where you're relying on just one node for everything, and it's just better off to have more than one just in case. The constructor for DC-aware round-robin policy is defined when using with load balancing policy. Is this a question?
Undefined.
Is undefined? I don't. It depends. That should be there, and it is there. I believe that is because you're not using the current driver. That's the only thing I could think of. That's probably the 1.2 driver, not the 2.0 driver. Because that used to use a, what was it, the policy.default or something like that. At what point do parallel statements perform better in the in clause? And is there a limit on how many keys should we put in the in clause? I mean, so basically, I think the first question is, are there parallel statements in an in clause?
No, there isn't parallel statements in an in clause.
I mean, that statement goes directly to the coordinator.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, the in clauses do not get parsed by the driver. That actually was I think it was a feature request at one time. But as of now, they don't get parsed on the client driver. So that just gets sent to the coordinator, and then it's up to the coordinator to deal with it. And what's the limit? Now, there's a trivia question. What is the limit? I think I've heard this before. I think it's 64,000.
Okay.
That's a trivia question. So I think the most you can put in it. But it's one of those practical limits, I think, Jeffrey, is that if you are putting in a lot of values in your in clause, you're going to see a performance hit. It's just like doing a large batch. It's going to hurt. Bust up. I actually, we were just talking about this. Instead of using an in, use prepared statements and an execute async in a loop.
Yeah, that's probably a better idea.
Yeah,
for sure.
Take advantage of futures. Get that nice parallelism, concurrent programming.
Right.
Yeah. We end up having to cache too many prepared statements across sessions. I don't know if that's a question.
Yeah.
Do we have a default retry for connections on a read-write operation? And
the default will cover the read and write operations.
Yeah,
it should cover it. Yeah.
And are there per host stats for connections in Cassandra? Of course.
Yes.
JMX.
Mhm.
So that's always. I should qualify that. JMX would be Java.
Right.
So if you're using Java, you can also you can ask for statistics. If you're using Java driver, I use metrics, the metrics library for that. Next question: how do I get a list of nodes per keyspace? So I think that what he's asking is which node per keyspace. That's not really that doesn't make any sense actually. So it's keyspace. It's not a keyspace. It would be a cluster.
Yeah, I list of nodes per keyspace. It doesn't.
Yeah, so it would actually be a list of nodes per cluster. A cluster is the entity.
Right.
Keyspace is inside the cluster. So. But getting a list of nodes is just a matter of, you can ask for that, right? So you can say, go like system.local.
Yes.
So, okay, batch size, the 5,000 level referred to as the data size or number, it's size. It's size. So when we're talking 5K, that's total size of the batch itself. So if you had 3 statements that were really big, and they go over 5K, it's really a matter of managing the amount of JVM heap that you're throwing at this thing. It's a warning. It's not going to stop it, but it's just you should be paying attention to batches that have large size like that. The guidance, less than 100 statements, less than 5K data. That's the general rule of thumb, and it's hitting one or the other. So 100 statements is quite a few. But then if it's less than 5K, it's not as big of a deal. If you hit the 5K limit, no matter how many statements you have, still one you need to think about. You're much better off doing concurrent programming. No problem. All right, last couple of questions here, and then we're going to wrap up. What should we do to avoid timeouts of Cassandra connection from low-use application having to reconnect every 5 minutes? Well, if I recall, so if this is the Java driver, you won't have to do that, right? It's just going to do a persistent connection.
Yeah, it should just stay connected.
It's using Netty
Yeah.
for that. So I don't, and you know, I hear this question sometimes from Oracle developers, because and this is something that I'm near and dear to my heart. With Oracle, you had so much setup costs and every connection that, you know, you would connect to it and it would take forever to log in and get all that stuff. That just doesn't exist in Cassandra. All right, do you suggest a special driver property to use a huge data load, like loading a few million rows of 1,000 bytes each? He wants to write a loader.
Okay.
So you suggest using a driver property. I mean, so I think what he's asking is there any tweaks to make a larger set like that work?
No. I don't think there is any.
Yeah, I mean, for that, I mean, it's a few million rows of a meg each. There's nothing. I mean, there's nothing the driver's really going to help you with there. Yeah, it's more of probably more of a server consideration. Okay, well, I think this wraps it up. Thank you for all the really interesting questions. Again, you know, check out planetcassandra.org and try Cassandra and look at the client drivers pages. There's a lot of tutorials on there. Questions, you can always go to Stack Overflow. We're always there. Twitter, hit up Rebecca, myself. We threw Luke in there, Luke Tillman. And if you want to do some free training, I also recommend that. academy.datastacks.com. Good for you, good for me, and it is 100% free. And that is a good thing for your career, believe me. We've been doing a lot of work on that lately, so hopefully got something there for you. Thank you very much, and we'll see you at the next webinar.